Hello, and welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, Lee and I are talking about being a woman in the legal profession. And we will warn you, we've all had very frustrating weeks, so this might just get a little crazy. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan, that's me, and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience, so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, Bar Exam Toolbox, the Catapult Conference, and the Trebuchet Legal Career site. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School, which might be particularly relevant in this episode. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about a topic very close to our hearts, being a woman in the legal profession, which, unfortunately, isn't always great. So to start off, do we even need to talk about this? It's 2016. Aren't we over gender problems by now, Alison?
Yeah, I wish that were true, unfortunately. I feel some days like you just have the same conversation over and over and over again. And I feel like I've been having the same conversation for I don't even know, 10 years now? Maybe half my life? I don't know. It's just so frustrating. You're I don't know. I feel like we're always talking about isn't it horrible that there aren't women partners? And it's Jesus Christ, this has been, women have been half the population of graduating law schools for 30 years. Mm-hmm. This is not a pipeline problem. So yeah, I think we do have to talk about this.
Yeah, I think we do. It's not to say that things haven't gotten better. My mom is an attorney and she has some crazy stories of when she entered the legal profession. Things are definitely better when I entered the legal profession than when she did, for sure. But I think things still are not great.
No, and I think they're not at all where they need to be. We're still, I saw on Above the Law today that a judge sanctioned an attorney who had been practicing for 30 years, so probably started around the time your mother started, for insulting a female attorney opposing counsel in a deposition. It's who thinks that's acceptable?
I don't know. I was just reading a New York op-ed about Donald Trump and the
God.
things he says about women. So I don't know. I think it's crazy. It's crazy what is still said about women in public, let alone the legal profession. It's spooky and really disturbing. So I think it is a time to continue the dialogue because, there's plenty to be concerned about. And I think the only way you can cope about it is to kind of be aware of what's going on.
Right. For me, I was personally surprised, frankly, at how awful the legal profession specifically is. Before I went to law school, I worked as a programmer. Let's face it, tech companies in the Bay Area or tech companies in general do not have the best reputation as places for women to work. I think they're deservedly getting a lot of attention for that, as they should. But the reality is my experience in law school and working as a lawyer was 100 times worse than my experience working as a programmer, which I was frankly shocked about. It's the things that go on in a lot of these law firms just is not even that unusual. You're lawyers. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I had higher expectations for ethics and morality among people, or even just the practicalities of it. It's what the law is. Are you really behaving like this? I don't know. I was shocked.
Yeah. I definitely thought it was interesting because I did high tech consulting, so also in a tech field right before law school. And I would go to plenty of meetings, especially with developers, where I was the only woman in the room. I was not a developer, so I was the diversity person because I was the client facer, who met in all of these teams of men. And I remember thinking wow, this is incredible. And I think, I think unfortunately the legal profession in some ways, when you walk in with your first class of your firm associates, I think mine was fairly diverse, at least as far as men and women. But the women in my class, I actually don't know if there are any left at this point. I think they're all gone.
Right, and I think you see that, I mean, that's a really common pattern. It's like summer associates, it's 50-50, or sometimes even more women, if they're very progressive. Even 1L, starting associates, maybe it's about 50-50, but, the reality is, like, women are much more likely to leave firms and faster. They're much, much less likely to make partner. We can talk later about, our experiences and why we think some of this is, but, you see this at sort of every aspect of the profession almost. I mean, if you look at like judges or in-house counsel or whatever it is, you're kind of stuck at this like 20% mark. And it's like, this is freaking ridiculous.
I think one of the hard things is when you start to unpack this problem, and we definitely do not have the answers to this problem. We like to talk about it, but we definitely don't have all the answers, is that it's hard to know kind of who to blame in a sense, because we've read things that make us furious from female women partners in the law, just as well as men. So it's not that. Well,
there are a lot of people who are perfectly happy to blame the women.
That's true. And there's
like you should try harder.
Right.
It's like, okay, great, thanks. That's really not helpful.
I just remembered was the article that went around with the email that was sent out by the partner to the woman, the new mom in the elevator. Like, it was about it gets better. Do you remember that?
Is that the one about her crawling up like under the desk in a fetal position for like 2 weeks at a time? Yes. And people are celebrating this as like encouragement?
Yes, when she was a new mom. Yes.
Yeah, I do remember that. I did not, I was putting myself in the position of the young mother in the elevator and thinking, I'm not sure that I would find this very reassuring.
Right. In fact, I think we're going to have to find that article and add it to the show notes. I'll make a note.
Yeah, that was a really classic one.
It was. But so,
the one day you're like, okay, maybe like this older partner who's a woman is trying to be supportive, but it's just like, good God, like, are you crazy?
Yeah, I know. So, it's hard because I think it's a problem with the profession as a whole. It's a problem bigger than our profession, but I think within our like legal bubble, there are real struggles, I think, in the model of practicing law that makes it hard to be a woman in the legal profession.
Right. I think, it's almost like you can think of it like a funnel. Like, yes, there are problems with gender in the overall workplace, and then there are specific probably heightened problems with gender in the legal profession. And then there are heightened ones maybe in your law firm or in your company or in your NGO or wherever it is that you're working. Mm-hmm. I was frankly shocked at what goes on in a lot of these law firms. And I worked, I summered 3 different places, and then I worked at a different place again. And I will say I have never experienced the type of things in the workplace that I experienced in pretty much all of those locations. Mm-hmm. Just like shocking stuff where you're like, I cannot believe this is happening.
Mm-hmm. And you've even written about those if people want to go to the Girls Guide to Law School and find them.
Yeah, I wrote a specific Miss JD post that got some very interesting comments. Again, actually largely from women, kind of blaming me for this experience, to which I responded. We can put those in the show notes too. It's going to be really interesting. It's going to be an interesting collection of show notes today.
It is. So, yeah, and and I think the messaging to young women can be very challenging. We go to a lot of women in the law events, both when we were working at our respective firms and still continuing. We go to bar association things, we go to talks, we go to lectures at law schools, we go to tons and tons of stuff. And sometimes I think it is very challenging to digest some of the messages, because sometimes the messaging is, I kind of call it, again, like the Martha Stewart problem. Like, I'm perfect and create all this perfection. Why can't you? And until you go to jail. I know that's where it all falls apart. But I've been using
Martha got cool once she went to jail.
They did. But before that, it was all about perfection and image. And I've been to so many of these talks. Alison and I have been to them together, where the message is, I have 3 kids. I'm a partner in this law firm. I have $10 million worth of business. I cook dinner for my family at night. I'm happily married. Why can't you?
Yeah, and we even get this, we've had this conversation numerous times in person and on various online discussions about whether you're failing feminism if you leave a high-power, high-stress job.
Right.
And people seriously believe this. I'll go on record as saying I completely disagree, and I think they're crazy. But, we're still having this argument. And I just think it's really difficult to figure out, just like the day-to-day of being a functioning human being who happens to be a woman in the legal profession. And then there are all these like messages about like what you should be doing. And I mean, it's stuff about like what you're wearing, and everybody has an opinion on everything. And it can kind of make you crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, not to even mention, like, you know, I know you have a small child, like that. We'll get into that later, but that's like a whole other can of worms.
Oh my gosh. And my respect for the complexity of this problem has only been exponentially increased after having a baby. Because one, it is one of those experiences that I don't think you can fully appreciate until you're living in the chaos. I mean, and the wonder as well, but there is chaos that comes with it. But you know, I think it creates specific challenges for women that, depending on how you and your family choose to handle parenthood, can make meeting the requirements of these jobs, you know, really, really difficult, or make you make some very difficult choices.
Yeah, and I think some of this is just the demands of the legal profession. I mean, part of the reality of being in a service business is, you know, you're at the demand of the court, you're at the demand of the client. I mean, I don't think it's necessary that things be run the way that they are. I mean, I think if you look at the accounting world, for example, or even some consulting companies, you know, they've approached this more as a business problem and said, okay, like people are burning out, they're leaving, we're losing a lot of good talent. How do we make it so that, you know, someone with a small child can stay through those crazy years, or, you know, a woman who has an interest in X, Y, or Z can actually, like, you know, do that. I mean, as we've talked about previously, I think firms in general are just not interested in this question. A lot
of them, I think that's true.
Oh, yeah, which is why you see these other organizations, you know, like the Axiom Laws of the world or whatever. I mean, there's a New York Times article we can link to. I think it was about lawyers, about, you know, letting women lean in, but not too far. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. It's like, I don't think that it is the case that people necessarily want to drop out of the workforce completely, or like drop out of the legal profession. It's just that the demands of the profession and the way it's structured at this point are just so completely insane that almost no one can function.
And wasn't there also a New York Times article or something that I came through my feed this week about how, like, to be happier, you just should pick time over money?
Oh yeah, I posted that yesterday, actually.
Yes, that's where I saw it then.
I'm glad you're reading my stuff.
I do.
Yeah, but I think that, you know, and I think, I put that on the Girls Guide Facebook page, and basically the point, without having to express it, was this is not the choice that most lawyers are making. You know, most lawyers are making a choice to give up time for something else. For some of them, it's money. For some of them, it's, you know, more internal motivations, like doing a good job or like working for a cause or whatever. But the reality is most lawyers are very time pressured.
Yeah. All right, so let's just unpack this problem, because I think it is we could go on and on for hours and hours. But I think that, you know, we just have like the nature of the profession that makes this it hard for women to either stay the course.
It's hard for everyone.
Well, for everyone to stay the course. But then specifically, we lose women on the way to the top, right? I mean, that seems to be it. And what do you think it is that really makes it difficult for women to find success in this model? Why don't we take the motherhood part out of it? Because I think that is somewhat of a separate, family things can be somewhat of a separate issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at the sort of research on this, a lot of this starts in law school. So if you look at how people did in undergrad and on the LSAT, you know, you would think that you could sort of extrapolate from that how they're going to do in law school. Well, it turns out that women do less well than would be predicted overall. And they also tend to experience more stress, like they don't have as, you know, particularly good experience, relatively speaking. They're under more pressure, and they're not getting the best clerkships. They're not getting the best jobs. You know, if you look at the rates of law review, like Miss JD does a study of law reviews and gender breakdown, and they're not getting on the law reviews. They're not, running the law reviews. And these are the things that sort of put you in this pipeline to these high-powered jobs. And so that's interesting right there. Like, what is it that's happening basically as soon as people start law school that's contributing to this lack of success?
Yeah. Gosh, there'd be so many things, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it might just be, and it might be the somewhat abrasive culture of a lot of law schools. Do you think that has something to do with it?
No, I think it definitely does. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the culture. I think women on the whole, I mean, this is slightly stereotypical, but I think there's research supporting it, on the whole tend to be more collaborative, more looking for sort of the win-win, like less cutthroat. And so I think you get into this environment. I mean, I know for me, it was just like, it's sort of this weird, like, affront to all of the values that you kind of had before you got to law school, where you're like, wow, is this really like everything is a battle and there's really no like way that there can be a win-win, like everyone has to be a loser or a winner, and it's just a foreign sort of environment. I think also, and this is actually part of the reason, the motivation for starting the Girls Guide to Law School was, I think, informal networks of information transfer are very important in law school. So, if you have someone who sort of takes you under their wing and says like, here are the good outlines or that kind of thing, it's easier. And, again, I think studies have suggested men tend to have more of those networks. I mean, you even hear like crazy stories about like, my frat brother like gave me, the good outline or I mean, I'm not making this up. Like,
right.
So, if you can tap into that sort of knowledge, you have your odds of doing well are higher. So part of my motivation was like, fine, like you guys can have your frat boy outlines, but I'll put up a website that anyone who wants to can read it, and I'll make it pink so girls are more likely to read it. And like give people this information. Like it's not rocket science.
Yeah. So it's interesting that the problem kind of starts in law school and then continues on. I mean, I think, the legal profession is not necessarily collaborative. I think depending on what type of law you practice, I think that tone kind of continues into the profession. And then I think a lot of it does have to do with personal choices around, what lifestyle that you would like, even beyond possible discrimination in the workplace and possible sexual harassment in the workplace. It's just women making choices, not even necessarily about motherhood, but what kind of life that they want.
Well, I think on average, women are less likely to put up with like the crap that goes on in like the life of a lawyer. I mean, and some of that I think is basically because even to this day, like you're not, imagine in a scenario where like two lawyers are married. Well, who's the one who like really is supposed to support everybody? Like it's going to be the guy, and I think, this is part of the feminist argument. I think it's equally bad for like the man that he's stuck in that position of like having to keep this job. Like both of them hate their jobs. Like, who's going to get to quit in the end.
It's true. Yeah, it is true.
So I don't know. I think, in some ways it's like, well, at least you can drop out if you're.
That's true.
But yeah, no, I think, the workplace is not, tends not to be very flexible in terms of hours, tends to be a lot of FaceTime requirements, that sort of thing that I think just inevitably is more difficult to put up with, when the demands of like other aspects of life start increasing.
Right. And that's not to say you can't do it. I have friends who are very successful in their law firms and they have outside personal lives that they're very happy with. It can be done for some people. The trade-offs work for them and they have found success. They're on the right type of team, practicing the right kind of law. It can be done. I think the issue is overall, there's just a trend that it's not necessarily set up so that women as a whole like to stay there.
Yeah.
Or people as a whole, really.
People as a whole, exactly.
A separate podcast.
Yeah, and I think it's just unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate that the profession is, it's almost so unwelcoming for human beings. Sorry if anyone was listening in your law school. This sounds like a really dour episode. But, I think people need to know what you're getting into because it is a lot about what are you willing to give up in order to do this job.
Well, and I think it goes back to a podcast we did early on about authenticity. And that one of the things I think a lot of law students don't give themselves space to do because they're so caught up in the grind is really thinking about what kind of lawyer you want to be, what kind of business person you want to be, if that's the type of work that you want to do. What does your life look like as a whole? How are you going to balance the demands of career and life, and what is your value of your time, and how do you want to spend that time? I think sometimes you don't really ask yourself those questions until you're unhappy. And then you end up having to shift gears because you haven't been able to take any space, I guess, to really evaluate that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that law schools are not very good at helping their students do. I think on average, business schools spend a lot of time talking about this sort of thing, giving people like surveys and techniques and all this sort of stuff for like really figuring out what do you want your career to look like. And law schools have not focused on that. I think it's just like, oh, if you can get X job, you should, and doesn't matter if you're going to drop out and like leave the profession in 3 to 5 years because you're already in the survey. It's like, check, you got a job after graduation. I think people need it's beneficial to sort of think longer term beyond just that first job, to think about what is my life arc going to look like? What is my career arc going to look like? Where do I want to end up when I've been working 20 years? And obviously you can't predict this completely in advance, but do you want the lifestyle of a partner in a law firm, or not? And if the answer is no, then it's like, well, do you even want to start doing that job? Like, there are reasons to do it, but I think you need to be clear about what it is that you're doing and what you're going to have to sacrifice in order to do well in this job.
Yeah. I mean, because the realities are, if you're traveling 50, 60% of the time, or if I know like you moved to Delaware.
Yeah, I was like living in a hotel in Delaware for like a month. Right. And it's like, yeah, you can't have a normal life at that point.
Yeah. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that life. It's just it's a very specific life. And I just think most folks don't really spend time thinking about it. And I think especially for women who are trying to balance a family life, or really any life of any kind, there are going to be trade-offs, and you have to be ready for that.
Yeah, and I think some of this is about like being strategic with your career. And, maybe it is the case that you're willing to invest a certain amount of time in like a very, very high stress, high demand environment like a law firm. Or it doesn't have to be a law firm. You could be working for the government, if you're going to work for like the Department of Justice or whatever, like that's going to be a very high, or, I have friends who work at the White House as lawyers or whatever. Like these are very high demand positions. And it's a question of, I'm willing, it's just about clarity, basically. Like I'm willing to do this for a certain amount of time because it leads me to somewhere else. And that somewhere else is more sustainable or more fulfilling or more whatever. And so it's about being strategic, and also about trying to develop relationships with people who can get you to that next position, which of course, that's another area where women tend to be potentially at a disadvantage. The reality is, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but, you have mentoring and then you have sponsorship. So mentoring is kind of helping you out, strategically, like what's, how are you going to get like this position or this assignment or whatever, what are your goals? And that's great. And it's helpful. And women tend to be over mentored. It's like there's the women's group or this and that. And you have like 10 mentors you're supposed to be going to coffee with every week. But they're under-sponsored. And so sponsorship is what someone says about you when you're not in the room. And so ultimately, if you're going to get that plum assignment, or you're going to be appointed general counsel, or you're going to make partner, or you're going to be promoted in your NGO, whatever it is, you need somebody there who's saying, this is the right person. I'm standing behind them. I'm putting my reputation on the line and saying we should give them this position. And women, unfortunately, tend not to be sponsored in that way. So I think, and I mean, to a certain extent, it's like, well, there's not a whole lot you can really do about that. But you can also be strategic about developing those relationships. If you have an opportunity to work with the managing partner of a firm, for example, take that opportunity.
Right.
So a lot of it's just about thinking along, about strategic lines. I mean, I was having lunch the other day with someone I used to work with, and she's now in-house. And so we basically sat around and strategized about like, well, if you want to be general counsel, what are the skills you need to develop? So I think and this is 5, 10 more years down the road, but she's already thinking about what are the things I need to know? Who do I need to know? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to get on my team, basically, to get this position?
Right. I think that's really true. And when you are looking for those mentors and sponsors, I think especially in the more traditional legal setting, be thoughtful of who you pick, because sometimes it's not only women. sometimes men can be really great advocates for you.
Well, often they're going to have to be because they're the only people who are there.
Well, that's true. And the one woman managing partner cannot mentor all of the women in the office.
And certainly can't sponsor every woman in the office.
No. And didn't we read another article a while back about, what is it, powerful men with daughters are much more likely to say rah-rah for their women employees. So maybe find some dads out there to be your mentors and sponsors. But talk to them about their values and what they think are important, because I think you also want to be getting guidance from people that you feel like are doing a good job with their own careers or balancing their own lives or whatever it might be. It's always interesting in my career path when I've had moments where I've looked at those, 5 years down the road from where I am, 10 years down the road. And then if you're saying, I don't really want that life. Well, that's pivotal for me.
I think we've talked about this before. Like before I decided to leave my big law job, I sat in my office and I thought about every partner I know and I went through them all. And I literally was like, do I want any of their lives? Would I trade places? And the answer was no. And then it's just like, well, what am I doing here? This is the path I'm on.
Yeah. Okay, so can we talk about kids now? Because this really is like, the kid thing is something that I always knew would be challenging if I had kept my big firm job. But I can honestly say for me personally, there would be absolutely no way I could be practicing law and taking care of my son and staying sane all at the same time. I know women who do it, and if you are listening to this podcast, I commend you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I am tired.
No, I mean, it's like I barely could manage that life without a child. I don't know how people do it. I mean, it's incredible.
And what's interesting is that I remember before I had a baby, I would talk to moms who were balancing it all, and they would, they talk about that it was hard, but they were making it work and whatever. And then once you have a baby, it's like you're in the secret club, and you talk to women and they'll say things like, oh yeah, there are months after I got back from my maternity leave that I don't remember because I was so sleep deprived.
Yeah, I'm sure they're doing great work as a lawyer at that point too.
Right. And it's like, okay, thanks for the honesty. Like, I appreciate that. But that was one of the things that really got me, is what I didn't understand about the challenges of balancing, motherhood and things like that, is really how things like exhaustion really plays into it. If you have a kid who isn't a great sleeper and you work in a very non-flexible work environment, I don't know how you function at a law firm level and then parent your kid in the nighttime hours and stay together at all. Alison, we don't have enough hands between the two of us to count the number of days you got emails from me that was just like, I can't even, this morning I'm going back to bed.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I remember when I was at the firm, like someone had a child and, she took her 3 months leave or whatever and came back, and she was working until midnight every night. And finally I was too, but I didn't have a baby. So I remember like running into her in the bathroom at like 1:30 in the morning on a Tuesday or whatever. And I finally was just like, how do you do this? And she said, I literally forget that I have a child.
Yeah.
She, not surprisingly, quit a few months later.
Yeah, there's no judgment for her for doing that work, but that's just part of the reality, and I think it's interesting because companies and some law firms are now saying, well, new moms come back to work. When you travel for work, we will, express mail your breast milk home to your baby. It's like, well, that's really nice, but like, I then still have to pump all that breast milk. Do you guys know how long that takes? And, am I going to be able to say, oh, I'm sorry at this deposition, we're going to have to take a 20 to 30 minute break. This mama's got to go lactate. Like, it's just like, we can't show breastfeeding pictures on Facebook. I can't imagine talking about breastfeeding in depositions.
No, I think I read something where like a woman who was pumping, who was a lawyer, was taking a deposition, and opposing counsel didn't want to give her the break to do it. I think he ended up getting sanctioned, but
Yeah. I mean, it's, and for those of you who have not lived through this pumping experience, it's a really big part of your life. You are on a schedule, you have to keep up with it, or, if you're committed to it, it's a big commitment. And so, yeah, I mean, it's very hard. We've also had friends who've had jobs that are not particularly supportive of it. Of course, that's illegal in many cases. But
or they're ostensibly supportive, but then, you know, someone's manager is like, oh, just don't tell anyone what you're doing in these half-hour breaks every day. So then the whole team is like, what's going on here? You know, it's kind of nuts.
I think for me, the scariest part is the fact that women feel like they can't talk about this part of their lives, which I think for many women, and men too, I'm sure men somewhat feel the same way, but that there's a fear about the openness of the fact that it is a struggle because you're supposed to be able to do it all and have it all. I guess that's that big, you know, can women have it all? But for instance, Alison and I were at a conference when I was pregnant. I was pretty pregnant at this point. There was no missing that there was a baby on the way. And someone who was male asked us when I told Alison I was pregnant. And I looked at him and I was like, right after I found out. And he looked at me shocked. And I had this moment of kind of sadness because I realized that a lot of women, that's not the norm. The norm is you hide it. You know, you have to hide the fact that you're going through this life experience, which can be very taxing on your body, very taxing on, you know, your life as a whole. I've seen many women that I knew were pregnant that nobody else did, trying to sleep in their office at lunch because they were so tired and have to lie about it, you know? And so to me, like a lot of the fact that we're not even openly discussing the challenges is what makes me so sad, because I think if it was easier for women to be honest about the fact that they're sleep deprived, that they are struggling with breastfeeding and pumping, or that they are missing their kids, or they can't work until midnight for these various reasons, I think things would get better. But that dialogue, I don't think, is happening as openly as it could, because the messaging, at least I see more, is it's all okay until you get the whispered stories, you know, about how everyone is having a hard time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of just like, suck it up and deal. Like, you knew what you were getting into. You knew what this job was going to be. You know, you're getting, in a lot of cases, paid a lot of money, but not even necessarily. I mean, you know, the demands are equally tough if you're like a public defender who's making no money. You know, and I just think it's difficult all around. Like, nobody wants to appear weak in the legal profession.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's just completely untenable. You know?
Well, and I think that may be one of the things about this specific, the motherhood topic, and the dialogue that I see written about it, is that any admission that things are hard or that there might need to be changes made is a sign of weakness. And I think that's really hard for me to take.
Yeah, I mean,
because talking about
is the reality
does not make you right. Talking about your struggles does not make you weak, actually. But you know, and I think it's interesting when I remember reading something, because Chelsea Clinton has a baby, or is now pregnant with her second baby, but she had a baby not long after I had my son, and it was interesting because she was saying like, oh well, you know, nobody just told me how hard it was going to be. I think it was about breastfeeding, to like pump and balance all of this stuff. There was like one little line in one article in like the whole thing that I've ever read about her mentioning motherhood. And it was like, oh my gosh, she just made this one little comment. And it's like, that's all of the dialogue. Everything else I'd seen was that her daughter slept great. It's like, why aren't we talking about what's really happening? Oh
yeah, I mean, until my friends started having babies, I had no idea how much time it took to pump every day, or even to breastfeed. You know, you're just like, you know, when you have a newborn, people are like, yeah, like I literally spend basically the entire day, or like 24/7, like doing this, and you're like, oh really? I thought it was just like you pop out a boob every now and then, you know? Like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it too, is that. You know, because everybody's experience is so different, and it can be varied on the type of kid that you have, the type of relationship you have with your spouse, how you divide responsibilities for the family, what kind of help you can afford, what kind of help you feel comfortable with, whether your family's helpful, whether you have multiple kids, like all of this stuff. It is a different journey for everyone, but I think we need to create an environment where women can be supportive of each other and be honest about what's going on, or I think people are going to continue to exit and maybe create their own environments, either through solo practice or by taking different paths, creating their own businesses, or leaving the legal profession where they feel like that they can have a bit more flexibility and freedom to balance these different parts of their lives.
Right. I mean, let's face it, you know, the sort of older generation of women lawyers is not necessarily that helpful on these topics because, you know, it's sort of like your mother, like they were like the pioneers and they did have to sacrifice a lot, which of course everyone respects, blah, blah, blah. But the world has changed and people have different expectations and they're not willing to necessarily give up everything to be a partner at a law firm. And I think that's totally fine.
And if you are willing to make that balance because it's important for you, go for it.
Absolutely. Like if somebody comes to me and they're like, it is my goal in life to be like, you know, X, to get this position, whether it's a firm partner or like head of, you know, whatever, this and that, government. I'm like, great. Like I will do everything in my power to enable you to do that. Yeah. But that better be your choice.
But you know, when we both read Sonia Sotomayor's book, I found it refreshing how honest she was about that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I really, if you haven't read her biography, I think it's, do you remember what it's called? Is it My Beloved World? Am I remembering that correctly?
I can't remember.
Okay, well, we'll add that link in the show notes too. But it's quite good. I mean, I read it a few years back, I think. I think I read your copy.
maybe that's where mine went.
I think that's probably why I can't find it. I think it's on my bookshelf. But, you know, I think she, who chose not to have children and didn't remarry after her first marriage failed, was very honest about the fact that her career path was her priority and that she, you know, had close, you know, family and friend relationships outside of, you know, creating a typical family and that was fulfilling for her. And she wasn't apologetic about it, nor should she need to be.
Right. I actually loved it when she was appointed to the Supreme Court, which most people would think like, oh my God, like you've got to be happy about every aspect of it. And she actually came out and was like, I'm sad to be leaving New York. Like my friends are here. Like I don't actually want to live in DC. And she got a lot of flack for that. People like, oh, it's so ungrateful. Blah, blah. But it's like, she had created a life for herself. It makes sense that she wouldn't be that happy about leaving it.
Yeah. You know, I think another thing that we have to think about as a profession is if we want to, that the only women who can really become those leaders oftentimes have to decide that that's their only goal. Because, you know, men typically haven't had to make the same extreme changes. Of course, if a man wants to hold a lot of those positions, they sometimes can still have a family that's basically run by their wives, or their partners, but they, you know, they don't get access to that family maybe as they would like. But I think we can't just say that the only way that you can, you know, be in one of these elite offices or hold one of these elite positions is to have foregone having a family life. I mean, most people don't ever think about this. I read an article by, there was an interview of Ruth Bader Ginsburg a while back, and I think it was actually her Vanity Fair article, which was quite good, where she's mentioned that she's the only person on the Supreme Court who's had a baby.
Wow.
She's the only person.
Huh.
Yeah. So there are 9 people making a lot of really important decisions about life and balance and things about men and women and access to things. And only one of them
in all of history.
Well, that's not true. In all of history. She's the only sitting one. Because Sandra Day O'Connor.
Right, that's what I thought.
So she's the only one on the court currently. Yeah. But right now the court, I mean, and that's not to say that that Kagan and Sotomayor are not incredible women. I mean, they're Supreme Court justices. They're such incredible women, but they have chosen a different path. And I think for me, it just said something about maybe our legal profession and our community as a whole of asking women to say, well, if you want these top jobs, then you pick.
Right. No one's saying that to men. I mean, I think, you know, whatever, Scalia has like 5 kids or something. So it's not like...
Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's just something that really struck me for some reason. That there was just one woman holding that seat. You know, of course, there haven't been that many women holding that seat at all. Anyway,
right. Well, so I loved her thing when people are like, how many women are enough on the Supreme Court, and she says 9, and they're kind of like, what? She's like, you never questioned it when it was all men.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. Did you see her grand collar she was wearing at the State of the Union? She was rocking an awesome Ruth Bader Ginsburg collar at the State of the Union. There's a great picture of her hugging Obama. But anyway, so I'm going to miss her so much someday when she's not a member of the Supreme Court. But anyway, I think, it just shows that it's in all different parts of our profession. It's going to be very challenging to find a way that women can not only succeed, but have a life that they want, whatever that life may be.
Right. And we are actually over time, but I don't want to wrap up without at least asking one more question, which is, what in the world are people supposed to do about this? I mean, this has been a pretty bleak podcast. Like, is this totally helpless? Like,
is it because it's all rainy outside?
You've had the stomach flu. I can only hear out of one ear. Yeah.
I know. It's been quite a few weeks here at the law school toolbox. I think basically one of the things that people can do is really, before they enter the profession, they can take some time to really think about what they want from life and talk to other people and find out what they do. Like one of the things, Alison, that you were doing at the Girls Guide to Law School, I think when we started working, when you would interview lawyers, you would ask them what their typical day looked like. I thought that was so brilliant because I think a lot of people in law school have no idea what a typical day in a life looks like.
Absolutely. I mean, I think people, literally have no idea what they're getting into. Certainly when I showed up to be a summer associate, I did not have a very clear idea of what I was getting into. I was rapidly disabused of that, and had a pretty clear idea by the end of the summer. I think it's just, people have to be realistic about what they're signing up for. And
right. And if you think that you can make it all work and what you sign up for is you're like, yes, those trade-offs are worth it for me to climb to the top of the profession. Awesome.
Yeah, great.
Like, go you.
Exactly.
I just want you to know about them so you can, as you're thinking about your future path, of course, which will have some unexpected twists and turns, that you know what you're getting into.
Yeah. And, it goes back to being strategic. Hopefully people, when they go to law school, I mean, this is often not the case, but you have some clue about what you actually want your life to look like when you get out, and being strategic about that and looking for the people who can help you and really building relationships with people that you trust, because, those people are the people who are going to get you through. They're the people who are going to help you get that next job. The great news about being a woman is you've got other women in the profession. They're all going through the same sort of stuff. And you can actually, if I think about the people that I've ended up staying friends with after my big law job, it's basically all women. And it wasn't like I went in there expecting that to be the case. And I had plenty of guy friends. I just don't still talk to them because they weren't, they were ultimately it was just, those were relationships of convenience. We were friends because we worked in the same office. But really the people, in fact, one of them I'm going to see after this podcast with her new baby. Those are the people that were really the ones who were there after, have stayed important professional and personal friends. And so I think it is good to really think about those relationships.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's important to look for those, the right mentors and sponsors, as we talked about earlier in the podcast. They don't always have to be women, but if you can find women to help champion your career, I think that can be great. One of my quotes from Madeleine Albright that I'm loving these days that we saw Hillary Clinton speak, and she mentioned was there's a special place in hell for women who will not help women.
Absolutely.
And I think, you should be able to find women that will want to, help you up the ladder, but also to help you decide how to balance your life. So hopefully you don't have to exit. I think that's one of the things you can do is look for those resources and find workarounds. I do have friends who work part-time at their law firm, which part-time at a big law firm, just so people know, is 40 hours a week.
With half the pay.
With half the pay.
Hey, it's still better than, if it works for you, better than dropping out.
Right. Exactly. But, it's if you think that that's your avenue, you should start researching that early to see if that's a possibility. What does that really look like? And talk to people who've done it. So reach out to your network and, and find those people you can be honest with, because I think that the ability to be honest is important. I think one of the things that I've appreciated so much about Alison's and my relationship and building this business together, especially through the transition of deciding to start a family and then starting a family, has been my ability to be honest about not only my struggles, and I can talk to her as a friend, about my struggles, but also as a business partner of I need your help, and she says, I will help you.
Right, or we'll hire someone to do this.
Or we'll hire someone to help, or we'll come up with a solution, not something's wrong with you, Lee, just go get some more sleep.
God, Lee, why can't you just pull it together and work 12 hours a day like you were doing before? Exactly. I don't know, have your husband take care of the kid or something. Right. Yeah, that doesn't really work.
No. So, I think for me, that's been such a big benefit. And, even when somebody asked me that question about when I told Alison I was pregnant, that just was such a great window into the fact that you do want to find a supportive place to be if that's what you want.
Yeah. And I mean, to each his own. I'm not going to tell somebody like what they should do. You make your own choices.
Yeah. Just collect as much information as you can to make choices that you can be happy with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Oh, I think we're out of time.
We're way over time on this one.
We're way over time. Sorry, guys. Hope this didn't run too long over your commute or your workout or however you're listening to us. Or we know that some people listen to us while they eat breakfast. So anyway, hope you had a long cup of coffee. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and ratings on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything in the future. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or Alison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.